A poor rancher's kindness brought 1,000 Apaches to his ranch at dawn. Wild West story. In the lonely stretches of the Arizona Territory, where the land was dry and hope often dried faster than the rivers, there lived a poor rancher named Elias Cole. His ranch was little more than a weather-beaten house, a leaning barn, and a handful of cattle that barely kept him alive. Every sunrise brought the same struggle, mending broken fences, searching for stray livestock, and wondering how long he could hold on before the land finally defeated him. Yet despite having almost nothing, Elias carried something many men in the Wild West had lost long ago, a heart that still knew compassion. One bitter night, when the wind howled like a wounded animal across the plains, Elias noticed movement near his fence. At first he thought it was a coyote, but as he drew closer, he saw a young Apache boy lying in the dirt, badly wounded and barely breathing. Blood stained the sand beneath him, and his eyes were clouded with pain and fear. Elias knew the danger instantly. Helping an Apache could make him a target. Many settlers feared retaliation, and the stories of revenge were enough to chill any man's spine. Still, Elias did not turn away. He knelt beside the boy, lifted him gently, and carried him into his home. Inside, Elias cleaned the wound with shaking hands, tore strips from his own shirt for bandages, and stayed awake all night feeding the boy water by the fire. He did not ask the boy's name or where he came from. He only knew that leaving him to die would haunt him forever. When dawn finally broke, the boy was alive, weak but breathing. Elias cooked what little food he had left and shared it without hesitation. By the next morning, the boy was strong enough to leave. Elias gave him a water skin, some dried meat, and the only horse he owned besides his work mare. The rancher pointed toward the distant hills and spoke softly, telling the boy to return to his people and live. The boy looked at him for a long moment, eyes filled with something deeper than fear, gratitude. Then he rode away, disappearing into the vast desert. Elias stood alone, watching the dust settle, believing he had done a small, foolish kindness that would cost him dearly. He expected trouble, or perhaps nothing at all. What he did not expect was that his simple act would travel farther than he ever could. In the quiet that followed, Elias returned to his daily struggle, unaware that his mercy was already echoing across the land, carried by a boy whose life he had saved and whose people would soon remember the name of a poor rancher who chose kindness over fear. Before the third dawn arrived, Elias Cole slept uneasily, troubled by a feeling he could not explain. The desert was unusually quiet, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Then, just as the sky began to pale, a deep vibration rolled through the ground beneath his bed. Elias sat upright, heart racing. At first, he thought it was thunder. But there were no clouds, only the steady growing sound of hooves. Many hooves? Too many? He stepped outside, the cold morning air biting into his skin, and what he saw nearly stole the breath from his lungs. Across the open plain surrounding his ranch stood a vast line of Apache warriors, stretching farther than his eyes could follow. Horses snorted, feathers moved gently in the breeze, and painted faces watched him in absolute silence. There were at least 1,000 of them. Rifles rested easily in strong hands, and spears caught the first light of the rising sun. Elias understood instantly that if they wished him dead, there would be no escape. Fear clawed at his chest, but Elias did not run. He did not reach for a weapon. He slowly raised his hands and stood still, knowing that whatever fate awaited him would come whether he resisted or not. Memories of the wounded boy flooded his mind, and for a brief moment he wondered if his kindness had led these warriors here to punish him. The thought hurt more than the fear itself. Then movement rippled through the crowd. A single rider emerged and approached the ranch at a calm, deliberate pace. He was an older man, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding without a word. Beside him rode another figure, smaller, familiar. As they drew closer, Elias recognized the boy, the same one he had carried into his home and saved from death. The chief stopped a few feet away and studied Elias with sharp, unreadable eyes. The silence stretched painfully long. Elias felt the weight of 1,000 warriors watching his every breath. Finally, the chief raised his hand. At once, the Apaches dismounted, not as an act of surrender but of respect. The chief spoke in a deep, steady voice, his words translated by a younger warrior. He said that the boy was his son, wounded while escaping enemies, and that Elias's actions had reached their camp like a whisper, carried on the wind. Among his people, saving a life created a bond stronger than blood. Elias listened in disbelief, barely able to process what he was hearing. When the chief bowed his head, Elias felt his knees weaken. The fear that had gripped him moments earlier dissolved into something else, astonishment, humility, and a realization that this dawn was not the end of his life, but the beginning of a legend he never intended to create. As the sun climbed higher, the Apache chief remained before Elias Cole, his expression firm yet calm, like stone shaped by years of wind and war. He spoke again slowly, explaining that among his people, a life saved was a debt that could never be repaid with words alone. Elias listened, hardly believing that the same warriors he had feared since childhood now stood on his land because of gratitude, not vengeance. The desert, once so empty and cruel, suddenly felt alive with meaning. At a signal from the chief, the warriors moved, not toward the ranch in violence, but with purpose. Packs were unloaded from horses, and soon the ground filled with sacks of corn, dried meat, hides, tools, and blankets. Elias watched in stunned silence as supplies he had never dreamed of owning were placed before his door. Horses were led forward, strong and healthy, offered freely. The Apache boy stepped closer, his wound healed, and met Elias's eyes with a quiet smile that said more than any words could. In the days that followed, the Apaches did not leave. They camped nearby, not as occupiers, but as protectors. Warriors patrolled the land around the ranch, their presence like an invisible wall. Bandits who once prowled the area vanished. Even passing soldiers rode wide around Elias's land, sensing that this place was no longer unguarded. For the first time in years, Elias slept through the night without fear. The Apaches helped repair broken fences and strengthen the old barn. They showed Elias how to dig deeper wells and read the signs of the land more wisely. What had been a failing ranch slowly began to breathe again. Cattle grew healthier, crops survived longer, and the soil itself seemed to reward the cooperation between a lone rancher and a people long treated as enemies. Word spread quickly across the territory. Travelers spoke in hushed tones of a poor rancher protected by 1,000 Apaches. Some called him lucky, others called him foolish, but none dared challenge the bond that had formed. Elias never asked for protection, and the chief never demanded anything in return. Their agreement was built on something stronger than law, mutual respect. Each evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Elias sat outside his home, watching Apache fires flicker in the distance. He understood then that wealth was not measured in land or cattle, but in the trust earned by doing what was right when fear said otherwise. His kindness, given freely on a cold night, had returned to him multiplied beyond imagination, changing his life in a way no gun or gold ever could.